The Mississippi summer of 1837 pressed down on River's End plantation like a hot iron, flattening everything beneath its weight. Eleanor Blackwood stood on the veranda of the grand white mansion, her silk dress clinging uncomfortably to her pale skin as she surveyed her inheritance. 300 acres of sugarcane, 24 cotton fields, and 87 souls. That's how her late father had described his legacy in the will. Not people, souls. Miss Eleanor, the new shipment has arrived. Joseph, the house servant, spoke from behind her, his voice carefully measured. Eleanor turned, her green eyes narrowing slightly against the glare of the afternoon sun. At 26, she was younger than most plantation owners, and certainly more inexperienced. 6 months ago, she had been living comfortably in Boston, far removed from the brutal realities of plantation life. The death of her father had changed everything. "Thank you, Joseph. Tell Mr. Harland I'll be there shortly." As Joseph retreated, Eleanor caught the flash of something in his eyes. Contempt, perhaps, or pity. She couldn't be sure. In Boston, she had been an outspoken critic of slavery, attending abolitionist meetings and donating to anti-slavery publications. Now she found herself the owner of nearly 90 enslaved people, with more arriving today. The irony was not lost on her. The auction had been Eleanor's idea. River's End was failing, the soil depleted after years of aggressive farming. New blood was needed, stronger backs to work the fields, according to Harland, the overseer her father had trusted for 15 years. Eleanor had agreed, telling herself it was temporary, that she would eventually find a way to free them all. But deep down, she knew that was a lie she told herself to sleep at night. The walk to the auction block took 5 minutes, but to Eleanor it felt like hours. The humidity made the air thick and difficult to breathe. As she approached, the sounds of commerce grew louder. The shouts of the auctioneer, the murmurs of potential buyers, and the occasional sob quickly silenced. Harland stood tall among the crowd, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he spotted her. "Miss Blackwood, you're just in time. We've got some fine specimens today." Eleanor nodded, her stomach turning at his choice of words. The auction block was a simple wooden platform, elevated just enough to display the human merchandise to advantage. Currently, a young man stood upon it, his dark skin shining with sweat, his eyes fixed on some distant point. The auctioneer was enthusiastically pointing out his strong back, his healthy teeth, his youth and vigor. $200. Do I hear 250? This fine buck will pick cotton from sunup to sundown without complaint. Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat, but forced it down. This was business, she reminded herself. Just business. As the day wore on, River's End acquired 12 new slaves, 7 men and 5 women. Eleanor had insisted on keeping families together, which Harland had reluctantly agreed to, though it had cost her more. By the time they returned to the plantation, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. "We'll put them in the east quarters," Harland informed her. "After they're processed, of course." "Processed?" Eleanor asked. "Cleaned up? Branded? Shown the rules?" Eleanor stopped walking. "Branded? Absolutely not. There will be no branding on River's End." Harland's face darkened. "Your father always—" "My father is dead, Mr. Harland, and I am not him." For a moment, tension crackled between them like summer lightning. Then Harland nodded, his expression unreadable. "As you wish, Miss Blackwood. But might I suggest we at least collar them? It helps prevent wandering thoughts." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Collars were a compromise she could live with, at least for now. "Very well. But I want to inspect the quarters first." Indeed, the slave quarters were a stark contrast to the grandeur of the main house. Single-room cabins lined a dirt path, each one housing multiple families. The smell of sweat and despair hung in the air like a miasma. As Eleanor walked through, she noticed how conversations died, how eyes lowered, how bodies tensed in her presence. The new slaves were being held in a separate building, the seasoning house, Harland called it. Inside they huddled together, exhaustion and fear evident in their postures. "This is your new home," Harland announced, his voice echoing in the sparse room. "You belong to Miss Blackwood now. You work hard, follow the rules, and you'll be treated fair. You caused trouble." He let the threat hang unfinished. Eleanor stepped forward. "You'll be assigned to your tasks tomorrow. For now, rest. Food will be brought shortly." As she turned to leave, a voice spoke from the group. "What happened to the ones before us?" Eleanor froze. The question came from a woman, perhaps in her 30s, with eyes that held no fear, only a cold assessment. "Excuse me?" Eleanor asked. "The ones who were here before. Where are they now?" Harland moved quickly, raising his whip, but Eleanor stopped him with a gesture. "It's a fair question," she said, then addressed the woman. "They're still here, working the fields, the house, the mill." The woman held Eleanor's gaze. "All of them?" A chill ran down Eleanor's spine despite the heat. Yes, all of them. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The woman's question haunted her. Of course, all the previous slaves were still there. Where else would they be? But something in the woman's tone had suggested knowledge, a secret Eleanor wasn't privy to. At 3 a.m, Eleanor rose from her bed, lit a candle, and made her way to her father's study. The room remained exactly as he had left it, books lining the walls, a globe in one corner, the massive oak desk dominating the center of the room. It was here that he had conducted the business of River's End for 30 years. Eleanor began searching through his papers, not entirely sure what she was looking for. Records of purchases, perhaps, or sales. Something to explain the woman's cryptic question. In the bottom drawer of the desk, locked and requiring the small key Eleanor wore around her neck, she found a leather-bound ledger. Unlike the official plantation records kept on the bookshelf, this one was personal, filled with her father's cramped handwriting. As she read, the candle burning lower and the night growing deeper around her, Eleanor's world began to crumble. The ledger detailed not just purchases and crop yields, but something far more sinister. River's End had a secret economy, one that dealt not in sugar or cotton, but in flesh and blood. According to the meticulous records, her father had been selling slaves, not just the occasional troublemaker or excess worker, but dozens each year. The entries were coded, but clear enough. Product delivered to New Orleans, 12 units. Special order for Baton Rouge fulfilled, 8 units. And most disturbing of all, experimental treatment successful on subject number 17, premium price obtained. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The last entry was dated just a week before her father's death. Final shipment arranged. Debt to be cleared upon delivery. A noise from outside the study made Eleanor start. She quickly closed the ledger and extinguished her candle. Footsteps passed by the door, then faded. A night guard, perhaps, or a restless servant. When dawn broke, Eleanor was still sitting at the desk, the ledger open before her, her mind racing with implications. River's End wasn't just a plantation, it was something far worse. And now, it was hers. At breakfast, Eleanor couldn't eat. The eggs and bacon turned to ash in her mouth as she considered what to do with her discovery. Confront Harland. Go to the authorities. But who would believe her accusations against one of the most respected planters in the county? "Miss Eleanor, are you feeling well?" Joseph asked as he refilled her coffee cup. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing him truly for the first time. How long had he been at River's End? Did he know what was happening? "Joseph, how many years have you served in this house?" 23 years, miss." "And in that time, have many slaves left River's End?" Joseph's face remained impassive, but his hand trembled slightly as he set down the coffee pot. "People come and go, miss. It's not my place to keep count. But if you were to estimate—" Joseph's eyes met hers briefly, then darted away. "More go than come, miss, that's all I know." Before Eleanor could press further, Harland entered the dining room, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Blackwood. Fine day for breaking in the new workers." Eleanor nodded, her mind still reeling. "Mr. Harland, I'd like to tour the entire plantation today. Every field, every building." Harland's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's quite an undertaking in this heat, miss. Perhaps another day?" "Today, Mr. Harland, after I change into something more suitable." An hour later, Eleanor followed Harland across the plantation, her dress replaced by a simpler riding outfit, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her from the sun. They visited the sugar mill, where the sweet smell of molasses hung heavy in the air, and the cotton fields, where rows of bent backs moved rhythmically through the white landscape. "And what's that building there?" Eleanor asked, pointing to a stone structure set apart from the others near the edge of the property, where the cultivated land gave way to cypress swamp. "Storage, miss. For equipment and such." "I'd like to see it." Harland's face tightened. "It's locked up tight. No need to trouble yourself with rusty tools and dust." "The key, Mr. Harland." For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then, with a tight smile, he reached into his pocket and produced a large iron key. "As you wish." The building was cool inside, a relief from the punishing sun. It took a moment for Eleanor's eyes to adjust to the dim light filtering through small, high windows. When they did, she saw that Harland had lied. This was no storage shed. The room was divided into cells, each with a heavy door and a small barred window. Most were empty, but in the furthest one Eleanor could make out a huddled form. "What is this place?" she demanded, though she already knew the answer. "Your father called it the seasoning house," Harland said, his voice lower now, all pretense gone. "It's where we prepare the special merchandise." "Special merchandise," Eleanor repeated, the words from the ledger coming back to her. "You mean people, slaves?" Harland shrugged. "Supply and demand, Miss Blackwood. Some buyers have specific needs. River's End has a reputation for quality." Eleanor felt sick. "Show me the occupied cell." "That wouldn't be wise." "The key, Mr. Harland. Now." With obvious reluctance, Harland unlocked the cell door. Inside, a young man lay on a thin straw pallet, his body covered in wounds at various stages of healing. He was shackled to the wall, and his eyes, when they opened at the sound of the door, held no hope, only resignation. "This is Isaiah," Harland said casually, as if introducing a horse or a dog. "Being conditioned for a buyer in Texas. Likes them broken, but not damaged." Eleanor stepped back, bile rising in her throat. "This stops now," she whispered. "All of it. I'm shutting it down." Harland's laugh was cold. "Are you now? And how do you plan to run River's End without this income? Your father's debts are substantial, Miss Blackwood. This operation is what keeps the plantation afloat." "I don't care. I'll sell the land if I have to." "And who will buy it? The soil is nearly spent. Without the other business, River's End is worthless." Eleanor turned to leave, her mind made up. "Release him. Release them all. I'm going to town to speak with the sheriff." Harland's hand closed around her arm, his grip like iron. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Miss Blackwood." Eleanor tried to pull away, but Harland was too strong. "Take your hands off me." "Your father knew better than to interfere with business," Harland said, his voice eerily calm. "I had hoped you would learn to understand as well, but it seems you're too much like your mother. Weak, sentimental." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air of the building. "You knew my mother?" "I knew her well enough to know she was a problem, just like you're becoming." With a surge of fear-driven strength, Eleanor wrenched herself free and ran for the door. But Harland was faster, cutting off her escape. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was his face, coldly determined, and behind him the eyes of the slave called Isaiah, watching with a terrible understanding. Eleanor woke to darkness and the smell of damp earth. For a moment, she thought she was back in Boston, having one of her childhood nightmares. Then the throbbing pain in her head brought reality crashing back. Harland, the stone building, Isaiah. She tried to move and realized she was bound, hands tied behind her back, ankles secured with rough rope. A gag prevented her from crying out. She was lying on what felt like a dirt floor, cool against her cheek. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Eleanor made out the contours of her prison. Not one of the cells she had seen earlier, but a smaller space, perhaps a root cellar or storage room. A single narrow window near the ceiling let in a faint glow. Moonlight, she guessed, which meant she had been unconscious for hours. Panic rose in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. Eleanor forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose, fighting back tears. She needed to think clearly if she was going to escape. Rolling onto her side, she began testing her bonds. The rope around her wrists was tight, but not cutting off circulation. If she could find something sharp. A sound outside the door made her freeze. Footsteps, then the scrape of a key in a lock. The door swung open, spilling lamplight into the room. Harland entered, followed by another man Eleanor didn't recognize. Tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed her with clinical detachment. "As you can see, Mr. Reynolds, we have a complication," Harland said. The man, Reynolds, circled Eleanor slowly. "She knows everything? Enough to be dangerous. Found her father's ledger." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "A shame. Edmund Blackwood was a valuable partner. We had hoped his daughter would continue the arrangement." "She's weak," Harland spat. "Talks of freeing slaves, of going to the authorities." "Then she must be dealt with," Reynolds said matter-of-factly, but carefully. "She's a white woman of means. Questions will be asked if she simply disappears." Eleanor tried to speak through her gag, managing only muffled sounds of protest. Reynolds knelt beside her, his cologne, something spicy and expensive, choking her. "Miss Blackwood, this is unfortunate for all of us. You could have lived quite comfortably, turning a blind eye as your father did. Now," he sighed, as if truly regretful, "now we have limited options." He stood and turned to Harland. "Prepare her for transport, tonight. We'll take her downriver with the others. By the time anyone thinks to look for her, she'll be well beyond reach." Harland nodded. "And River's End?" "We'll continue operations under new management. The paperwork is already being prepared, a sale made in haste due to the young mistress's sudden decision to return north. No one will question it." As they left, plunging Eleanor back into darkness, the full horror of her situation became clear. They planned to sell her, just as they had sold countless others from River's End. The White Mistress would become merchandise, erased from her former life as completely as the slaves whose names never appeared in the official ledgers. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. Hours passed. Eleanor worked at her bonds until her wrists were raw and bleeding, but the ropes held fast. Her mouth was dry, her stomach empty, her head pounding with each heartbeat. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm her, the door opened again. It wasn't Harland this time, but a woman, the same woman who had questioned Eleanor about the previous slaves. In her hands, she held a small knife. Eleanor's eyes widened in fear, then understanding as the woman moved behind her and began sawing at the ropes. "Be still," the woman whispered. "We don't have much time." As soon as her hands were free, Eleanor pulled the gag from her mouth, gulping in air. "Who are you?" she rasped. "My name is Sarah," the woman said, already working on the ropes around Eleanor's ankles. "Isaiah is my husband. We were sold to separate plantations last year, but I tracked him here." "You let yourself be sold to River's End deliberately?" Eleanor asked incredulously. Sarah's eyes were hard as flint. "People have been disappearing from River's End for years. Stories spread. I had to know if Isaiah was still alive. And now you're helping me? Why? Because you tried to help him, and because we need you if we're going to escape. You know this land, these people." The ropes fell away from Eleanor's ankles. She tried to stand, but swayed dizzily, her legs numb from being bound for so long. Sarah caught her arm, steadying her. "We have to move quickly," Sarah urged. "Harland and 2 others are preparing a boat. They plan to take you and 5 others downriver tonight." "Others? Who?" "Isaiah, for one, and 4 more who've been hidden in that building, all sold to the same buyer." Eleanor's mind raced. "How many people know about this? About what's happening at River's End?" "Most of the house servants, some of the field hands. those who've been here longest. And no one tried to stop it, to get help. Sarah's look was pitying. Who would help us? The law, the neighbors who run their own plantations. We survive how we can, Miss Blackwood. The truth of this struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Her own ignorance, her naive belief that she could simply arrive and change things seemed ludicrous now. "What's your plan?" she asked. "Get to the river before they do. There's a second boat, smaller, but it'll carry us. Make it to Baton Rouge, then north. To freedom." Sarah's expression was grim. To a chance. Moving through the plantation at night was like navigating a different world. Shadows transformed familiar buildings into looming threats, and every sound, a nightbird's call, the rustle of leaves, a distant dog's bark, sent Eleanor's heart racing. Sarah led the way with quiet confidence, avoiding the paths where guards might be posted. They skirted the main house, keeping to the shadows of oak trees, whose branches draped with Spanish moss created pools of perfect darkness. Their destination was the stone building where Eleanor had discovered Isaiah. Sarah had the key, stolen, she explained, from a moment of carelessness on Harlan's part. "He thinks himself invulnerable here," Sarah whispered as she unlocked the heavy door. "It makes him sloppy." Inside, the air was thick with suffering. Eleanor could almost taste it on her tongue as they moved past empty cells to the occupied ones at the back. Isaiah was in the first, his eyes lighting with dangerous hope when he saw Sarah. "You came," he breathed, reaching for her through the bars. "I promised, didn't I?" Sarah unlocked his cell, then handed the key to Eleanor. "Free the others while I help him." The other cells held 4 more people, 2 men and 2 women, all bearing marks of Harlan's conditioning. One man could barely walk, leaning heavily on Eleanor as she helped him from his cell. One of the women wept silently. Whether from fear or relief, Eleanor couldn't tell. "We need to hurry," Sarah urged, supporting Isaiah with her shoulder. "They'll be coming for us soon." The group moved as quickly as they could given their weakened state, making their way toward the river that gave River's End its name. The Mississippi was a dark ribbon cutting through the landscape, its surface reflecting the half-moon overhead. Sarah led them to a small wooden dock, hidden by overhanging trees. Tied there was a flat-bottomed boat, simple but large enough for their group. "Help me get everyone aboard," Sarah instructed Eleanor. As they were loading the last person, the weeping woman, who had still not spoken a word, a shout rang out from the direction of the main house. "They've discovered we're gone," Isaiah said, his voice tight with fear. Eleanor looked back toward the plantation. Lanterns were moving now, bobbing like fireflies as men searched the grounds. It wouldn't take them long to check the river. "We need to go now," she said, untying the boat with trembling fingers. "What about the others?" one of the men asked. Solomon, he had said his name was. "Others?" Eleanor asked. "In the fields, in the house. They'll suffer for our escape." Eleanor hadn't considered this, and the realization shamed her. Of course Harlan would take his rage out on those left behind. "We can't take everyone," Sarah said, practical even in crisis. "No," Eleanor agreed, "but we can give them a chance." She turned to Solomon. "Can you handle the boat? Get everyone to Baton Rouge?" He nodded, confusion in his eyes. "Yes, but then go, now. I'll create a diversion, buy you some time." Sarah grabbed Eleanor's arm. "They'll kill you." "Maybe, but they were planning to sell me anyway." Eleanor managed a grim smile. "Besides, this is my mess to clean up." Before anyone could argue further, Eleanor pushed the boat away from the dock. The current caught it immediately, pulling it into the center of the river where the water ran fastest. "Head downstream," she called softly. "Stay close to the east bank after the bend. There's a church in Baton Rouge, St. Joseph's. Ask for Father Thomas. Tell him Eleanor Blackwood sent you." She watched until the boat disappeared into the darkness, then turned back toward River's End. The lanterns were closer now, moving purposefully toward the river. Harlan would have guessed their escape route. Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Then she began running, not away from the lights but toward them, shouting as loudly as she could. Fire! Fire in the main house! It was the one alarm no plantation owner could ignore. Fire could destroy crops, buildings, and most importantly, valuable property in minutes. As expected, the pattern of lanterns changed, several breaking off and heading back toward the house. Eleanor kept running, her voice growing hoarse from shouting. She managed to reach the slave quarters before they caught her. Harland himself, with two men she recognized as overseers from neighboring plantations. Clever, Harland said, breathing hard from the chase, but not clever enough. Eleanor drew herself up to her full height, channeling every ounce of the Boston aristocrat she had once been. It's over, Harland. Even if you kill me, people will ask questions. The authorities— Harland's laugh cut her off. The authorities? The same men who dine at my table, who benefit from our operation. He shook his head. You really don't understand how things work down here, do you? I understand enough, Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. I understand that you murdered my father. This, at last, seemed to catch Harland off guard. What? He was planning to end it, wasn't he? That's what the ledger meant. Final shipment. He was going to stop. Harland's face darkened. Your father grew weak in his old age, started talking about legacy, about making amends, as if a lifetime could be erased with a few good deeds at the end. So you killed him, made it look like a heart attack. He was a liability, just like you. One of the other men shifted uncomfortably. Harland, we should move this somewhere private. Harland nodded, gesturing for his companions to take hold of Eleanor. As they grabbed her arms, a shout came from the direction of the quarters. Fire! The mill is on fire! This time it wasn't Eleanor's voice, but a chorus of them. Dozens of slaves emerging from their cabins, pointing toward the sugar mill where flames were indeed visible, licking up the wooden structure. In the momentary confusion, Eleanor wrenched free and ran toward the quarters. Behind her she heard Harland bellowing orders, torn between recapturing her and saving the valuable mill. Hands reached for her from the darkness, pulling her into one of the cabins. Inside, she found Joseph, the house servant, along with several others she recognized. Miss Eleanor, Joseph said, his usual deference gone. We heard what happened. Watchmen talk too much. The fire, Eleanor began. A distraction, an older woman explained. Won't destroy much before they put it out. But it gives us time, Joseph added. Time to choose sides. Eleanor looked around the cramped cabin. A dozen faces stared back at her, expressions ranging from fear to determination. What do you mean? Harland's been running things for years, Joseph said. Not just the trading. Everything. Your father was just a name to hide behind. And now you're that name, the woman added. Eleanor shook her head. I tried to stop it. I failed. Not yet, Joseph said. You're still the legal owner of River's End. That means something, even here. What are you suggesting? Joseph exchanged glances with the others before answering. A revolt, not with violence. We'd all die. But with the law, your law. I don't understand. Your father left papers. Will, property deeds, bills of sale, all legal. Harland has been forging your signature, selling people who legally belong to River's End. Eleanor flinched at the phrasing but understood the point. Theft. Serious theft, Joseph nodded. The kind that gets white men hanged, mistress or no mistress. For the first time since waking in that dark cellar, Eleanor felt a spark of hope. Where are these papers? Hidden. Your father kept copies separate from the ones Harland could access, in case of disagreements. Show me. Joseph led her to a loose floorboard in the corner of the cabin. Beneath it was a small metal box, the kind used for storing valuables. Inside were documents, dozens of them, all bearing her father's distinctive signature. As Eleanor examined them, the reality of River's End's dual economy became clear. The official records showed purchases and minimal sales, maintaining the appearance of a traditional plantation. But these secret papers documented the true business. The acquisition of people specifically for resale, the premium prices commanded, the network of buyers stretching as far as Texas and Cuba. "This is enough to destroy Harland," Eleanor said quietly. "But why show me? Why help me? After everything my family has done," the older woman spoke up. "Because some of us remember your mother. She was different. She tried to help, just like you're trying now. My mother. But she died when I was a child, in Boston." Joseph and the woman exchanged glances. "That's what your father told you," Joseph said gently. "The truth is, she died here, at River's End." "What? No, that's impossible. She had a fever." "She discovered what your father was doing," the woman interrupted. "Just like you did. But she didn't have anyone to help her escape." Eleanor felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Harland killed her too?" "Not directly," Joseph said, "but he made sure she had no help when she needed it. No doctor, no medicine." The implications crashed over Eleanor like a wave. Her entire understanding of her family, of her childhood, was built on lies. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered. "Who would have?" Joseph asked simply. "Your father controlled all communication from River's End, and later when you were older, would you have believed a letter from an unknown slave over your father's word?" He was right, Eleanor realized. She wouldn't have. Just as she had initially dismissed the new slave's suspicions about River's End. Outside, the commotion was growing more organized. The fire at the mill must be under control by now, which meant Harland would soon resume his search for her. "We need to move," Joseph urged. "They'll search the quarters next." "Where can we go?" Eleanor asked. "The boat is gone." "Not the river," Joseph said. "Town, the sheriff." "But you said the authorities are part of this." "Some are. Not all. Sheriff Taylor is new from up north. Harland hasn't had time to buy him yet." It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. Eleanor gathered the documents, securing them inside her jacket. "We'll need horses," she said, "and we can't all go. It would be too obvious." "Just you and me," Joseph agreed. "The others will cover our absence as long as possible." The older woman, Esther, Eleanor learned, provided them with dark cloaks. "Keep to the trees," she advised. "The moon's bright tonight." The stables were on the far side of the main house, requiring a dangerous crossing of open ground. Eleanor and Joseph waited in the shadows, watching the activity around the now smoldering mill. "Now," Joseph whispered as most of the men moved to inspect the damage. They ran, keeping low, heart pounding so loudly Eleanor was sure it would give them away. But they reached the stables undetected, slipping inside to the welcoming nickering of horses. Joseph moved with practiced efficiency, saddling 2 mounts, not the flashy thoroughbreds Edmund Blackwood had favored, but sturdy workhorses less likely to be missed immediately. "Can you ride, miss?" Joseph asked as he tightened a girth. "Yes," Eleanor said, then added, "And I think under the circumstances you should call me Eleanor." Joseph paused, something unreadable flashing across his face. "That'll take some getting used to." They led the horses out the back of the stables, mounting only when they reached the cover of trees. The town was 10 miles away, not far under normal circumstances, but a significant journey when being pursued. As they urged their horses into a trot, Eleanor looked back at River's End one last time. The grand white house gleamed in the moonlight, beautiful and terrible, built on blood and betrayal. "My mother," she said suddenly. "Where is she buried?" Joseph glanced back at her, his expression softening. "Under the magnolia tree, the big one by the east garden." Eleanor nodded, throat tight. Another lie exposed. Her father had told her there was no grave, that her mother's ashes had been scattered in the Boston harbor she had loved so well. "I'll come back for her," she promised silently, "after justice was done." They rode in silence after that, the urgency of their mission pressing down on them. Behind them, River's End grew smaller, its secrets temporarily contained but not yet exposed. Ahead lay uncertainty. Whether Sheriff Taylor would listen, whether the evidence would be enough, whether justice was even possible in a system built to deny it. But for the first time since arriving in Mississippi, Eleanor felt something like purpose. Her mother had died fighting this evil. Sarah and Isaiah were risking everything to escape it. She would not falter now. The moon tracked across the sky as they rode, casting long shadows that seemed to pursue them like the ghosts of River's End's victims. Eleanor clutched the precious documents against her chest, feeling the weight of responsibility they represented. By dawn, the town of Millerton was visible in the distance, a cluster of buildings nestled along the river's edge. The sheriff's office would be on the main street, Joseph told her. If they were lucky, Taylor would be there, not out on his rounds. As they approached the outskirts, Eleanor slowed her horse. "Joseph, you should wait here." He looked at her sharply. "Why?" "Because it's safer. If Taylor is part of this, or if Harlan's men are already in town, all the more reason for me to come. 2 witnesses are better than 1. Joseph, be reasonable. A white woman might get a hearing. A black man will be assumed to be lying or confused or acting above his station," Joseph finished. "I know the risks, Miss Eleanor. I've lived with them every day of my life. But this is my fight too, more than yours even." Eleanor wanted to argue further, but recognized the determination in his eyes. It was the same determination she had seen in Sarah, in Isaiah, in Esther. The will to fight despite impossible odds. "All right," she conceded, "but let me do the talking at first, please." Joseph nodded, and they continued into town, their exhausted horses plodding along the dusty street. Early morning activity was just beginning. Shopkeepers opening for business, a few wagons rumbling toward the market area, a group of children racing toward the schoolhouse. The sheriff's office was a modest brick building with barred windows and a hand-painted sign. Eleanor dismounted, legs stiff from the long ride, and tied her horse to the hitching post. Joseph did the same, his movements betraying his nervousness despite his brave words. "Ready?" Eleanor asked. Before Joseph could answer, the door to the office swung open, but it wasn't Sheriff Taylor who emerged. It was Reynolds, the man from the cellar. And behind him, smiling coldly, was Harland. Eleanor's blood ran cold as Harland's gaze locked with hers. His smile widened, predatory and triumphant. "Miss Blackwood," he said smoothly, tipping his hat as if they were meeting at a social gathering. "How fortunate. We were just filing a report about your disappearance." Reynolds nodded gravely. "Everyone is quite concerned, Miss Blackwood. Wandering off at night in your condition. Most worrying." "My condition?" Eleanor echoed, her mind racing to understand their strategy. "The doctor confirmed it before he left," Harland said with mock sympathy. "Nervous exhaustion, brought on by the strain of inheriting such a large responsibility. Quite common in delicate ladies from the north." Eleanor felt a surge of anger. "I'm not—" Joseph's hand closed gently around her arm, a warning. She bit back her protest, realizing too late the trap that had been laid. If they claimed she was mentally unstable, anything she said would be dismissed as delusion. A third man emerged from the sheriff's office, younger than the others, with a silver star pinned to his vest. Sheriff Taylor, Eleanor presumed, though his face showed no recognition at her arrival. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking from Eleanor to Harland. "No problem, Sheriff," Harland replied. "Just collecting Miss Blackwood. She's had a difficult night." Taylor's eyes narrowed slightly. "The lady doesn't look like she wants to go with you, Harland." A flicker of hope rose in Eleanor's chest. Perhaps Joseph was right about the new sheriff. "Sheriff Taylor," she began, "I need to report a crime. Several crimes, in fact, including murder." Taylor's attention sharpened. "Murder? Whose?" "My father's, for one, and numerous others at River's End Plantation." Harland's facade of concern vanished, replaced by cold fury. "This is precisely what the doctor warned about, Sheriff. Paranoid delusions. The lady needs rest and proper care, not an audience for her fantasies." "I have proof," Eleanor insisted, producing the documents from inside her jacket. "Records of illegal slave trading, forgeries, evidence of my father's murder, and possibly my mother's as well." Taylor hesitated, glancing at the papers Eleanor held out. For a moment it seemed he might take them, might listen. Then Reynolds stepped forward, his authoritative presence commanding attention. "Sheriff, I understand you're new to Millerton, so perhaps you don't recognize me. I'm Judge Reynolds, Circuit Court. I've known the Blackwood family for 20 years. This situation is delicate. A family matter best handled privately." "A judge," Taylor said, clearly impressed. "I wasn't aware. I try to maintain a low profile when not on the bench," Reynolds smiled modestly. "But in this case I feel compelled to intervene. Miss Blackwood's condition requires immediate medical attention, not a public spectacle." Eleanor watched the sheriff's resolve weakening. "These documents," she tried again. "Probably plantation records she's misinterpreted," Harland interjected. "Edmund Blackwood was meticulous in his bookkeeping, but the terminology can be confusing to someone unfamiliar with plantation management." "And the slave?" Reynolds nodded toward Joseph. "I presume he accompanied his mistress out of concern for her welfare?" Joseph's face remained carefully neutral, but Eleanor could feel the tension in him, the barely contained rage. "Joseph has been with our family for years," she said quickly. "He's a witness to what's happened at River's End." Taylor looked at Joseph for the first time, his expression guarded. "Is that right?" Before Joseph could answer, Reynolds cut in. "Sheriff, surely you understand the legal standing of slave testimony. It's inadmissible except in the most extraordinary circumstances. And given Miss Blackwood's mental state, I'd suggest any claims made by her servants should be viewed with extreme skepticism." The moment stretched, a silent battle of wills. Eleanor could almost see the sheriff's thoughts as he weighed his options. A new arrival in town, faced with the word of an established judge and plantation overseer against a possibly unstable woman and a slave. "I think," Taylor said finally, "that Miss Blackwood should indeed get some rest, and perhaps a visit from Dr. Warren wouldn't go amiss." Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her again, hope giving way to despair. "Sheriff, please, just look at the documents. You'll see—" "I'll certainly review any evidence you wish to present, Miss Blackwood," Taylor said, his tone placating, "after you've had a chance to recover from your ordeal." Harlan moved forward, reaching for Eleanor's arm. "Come, Miss Blackwood. Your household is very concerned about you." Eleanor stepped back, evading his grasp. "I am not going anywhere with this man. He tried to kill me last night." "Miss Blackwood," Taylor began. "Sheriff," Joseph's voice cut through the tension, steady and clear. "If I may speak." All eyes turned to him. Joseph stood straight, his dignity a rebuke to the assumptions made about him. "The lady is telling the truth. River's End has been operating a slave-trading operation for years, separate from its legitimate business. Those who discover it tend to disappear." Reynolds scoffed. "This is absurd. Sheriff, I really must insist." But Taylor held up a hand, his gaze still on Joseph. "Go on." "Last night, Miss Blackwood discovered evidence of this operation. Mr. Harland and Judge Reynolds, who is not just a business associate but an active participant, planned to sell her along with several other victims. They've already sent a boat downriver with 5 people who were being held in a secret building on the plantation." Taylor's expression was unreadable. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, sir. And one I'm willing to testify to under oath, whatever that's worth coming from me." A new voice joined the conversation. Female, authoritative. "Perhaps my testimony would carry more weight." Eleanor turned to see a woman approaching from across the street, middle-aged, expensively dressed, with a stern expression and a determined stride. Behind her walked 2 men in the uniforms of federal marshals. "Mrs. Carmichael," Reynolds said, his confident demeanor faltering slightly, "what brings you to Millerton?" "A letter, Judge Reynolds. A most disturbing letter from my cousin Edmund Blackwood, received posthumously." Mrs. Carmichael turned to Eleanor. "You must be Eleanor. I'm your Aunt Victoria. Your mother was my sister." Eleanor stared in shock. She had heard her father mention a Victoria occasionally, but always dismissed as a troublesome relative, best avoided. "Aunt Victoria, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Victoria said briskly. Edmund made quite sure of that after Caroline died, or rather after she was murdered. Reynolds recovered quickly. Mrs. Carmichael, these are serious allegations without foundation. Miss Blackwood is unwell. Save it, Reynolds, Victoria snapped. I've been investigating River's End for years. Edmund's letter simply confirmed what I already suspected. She turned to the sheriff. Taylor, isn't it? I understand you're new here. Allow me to introduce myself properly. Victoria Carmichael, Federal Prosecutor's Office, New Orleans District. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Taylor straightened, suddenly more official. Ma'am, I wasn't aware. Few people are, which is rather the point. Makes it easier to catch vermin like these. She gestured dismissively at Harland and Reynolds. Now, I believe my niece has some documents you should see. Eleanor handed over the papers with trembling hands. Victoria examined them briefly, then passed them to one of the marshals. Evidence to be logged, she instructed. And I believe we'll find more at River's End, won't we, Mr. Harland? Harland's face had drained of colour. This is a mistake. I was only following orders. Edmund Blackwood was the one. Save your testimony for the court, Victoria cut him off. I'm sure it will be fascinating to hear how you explain the murders of both Edmund and Caroline Blackwood, not to mention the illegal trading operation you've been running. Sheriff Taylor, recognizing which way the wind was blowing, moved quickly to assert his authority. Judge Reynolds, Mr. Harland, I'm placing you under arrest, pending further investigation. You have the right to remain silent. As the marshals took charge of the prisoners, Victoria turned to Eleanor and Joseph. You both look exhausted, and I imagine there are others at River's End who need assistance. Eleanor nodded, relief making her lightheaded. Yes, and there's a boat heading to Baton Rouge. 6 escaped slaves, including one named Isaiah. They'll need protection. We'll send word downriver immediately, Victoria promised. Now, is there somewhere safe you can rest while we secure River's End? Before Eleanor could answer, Joseph spoke up. If I may suggest, Mrs. Carmichael, there's a boarding house on Pine Street. The owner, Mrs. Wilson, is a good woman. Discreet. Victoria nodded approvingly. Excellent suggestion. And you are? Joseph, ma'am, house servant at River's End. I see. Well, Joseph, I believe your status may be changing shortly. She turned back to Eleanor. Your father's letter mentioned manumission papers for all the slaves at River's End. Eleanor's eyes widened. He was planning to free them. Eventually, after dismantling the trading operation, unfortunately, it seems Harland discovered his intentions. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Her father, preparing to end his involvement in the slave trade. Harland and Reynolds, unwilling to lose their profitable enterprise. A convenient heart attack, and then Eleanor herself, the unwitting inheritor of a blood-soaked legacy. The others at River's End, she said urgently. They're in danger if Harland's men realize what's happening. My marshals are already on their way there, Victoria assured her, along with a detachment from the militia. We'll secure the plantation and ensure everyone's safety. The next few hours passed in a blur. Eleanor and Joseph were escorted to the boarding house, where Mrs. Wilson, a no-nonsense widow with kind eyes, provided hot water for washing, clean clothes, and a simple but hearty meal. Eleanor was just beginning to feel human again when Victoria arrived with news. River's End is secure, she reported, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Wilson offered. Most of Harland's men surrendered without resistance when they saw the marshal's badges. 2 tried to run and were apprehended. The enslaved people are safe, though understandably confused about what happens next. And the boat? With Isaiah and the others? Eleanor asked anxiously. Victoria smiled. Intercepted safely just south of Baton Rouge. All 6 passengers are unharmed and being brought back to Millerton as we speak. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly in relief. Thank God. Indeed. Now, we have much to discuss regarding River's End and your father's estate. Over the next hour, Victoria outlined the legal situation. Edmund Blackwood's will, it turned out, had included provisions for the gradual manumission of all slaves at River's End, along with land grants and financial support to help them establish independent lives. These provisions had been concealed by Harland, who had presented Eleanor with an altered version of the will. "So the plantation was meant to be dismantled?" Eleanor asked. "Transformed," Victoria corrected, "into something resembling a cooperative farm, with former slaves becoming tenant farmers or landowners in their own right. It was quite progressive, if belated." "And this was why they killed him?" Victoria's expression hardened. "Among other reasons, your father knew too much about their wider operation. River's End was just one part of a network stretching across several states. When he threatened to withdraw, they couldn't risk him exposing the others." Joseph, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "There were rumors about other plantations, like River's End, places where people went in but didn't come out the same way." "Those rumors were well-founded," Victoria confirmed grimly. "We've been building a case against this network for years. Your father's evidence is the break we needed." Eleanor's mind was reeling with implications. "And my mother, was she murdered too?" Victoria's face softened with sorrow. "Yes, though more indirectly. She discovered evidence of the trading operation early in your father's involvement. When she threatened to expose it, she was eliminated, made to look like she died of fever. And my father allowed this?" Eleanor couldn't keep the horror from her voice. "He was complicit through inaction," Victoria said carefully. "But according to his letter, it was her death that eventually turned him against the operation. Too late, of course, and too slowly. But he did try in the end to make amends." It was cold comfort, knowing her father had developed a conscience only after years of profiting from human suffering. But it was something, a small redemption that had cost him his life. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "Justice, hopefully," Victoria replied. "Trials for Harlan, Reynolds, and the others involved. Restitution for those who were wronged. And for you—" "I don't want River's End," Eleanor interrupted. "Not as it was. I want to honor my father's last wishes, to transform it as he intended." Victoria studied her thoughtfully. "That won't be easy. You'll face resistance, possibly danger." "I'm aware, but I can't walk away now. I owe it to those who suffered there, to those who helped me despite every reason not to." She glanced at Joseph, who inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "Then you'll need help," Victoria said decisively. "Legal, financial, and practical. Fortunately, you now have an aunt who specializes in all three." The journey back to River's End the next day was surreal. The plantation looked unchanged from the outside, the white house still gleaming in the sun, the fields still stretching to the horizon. But everything else had transformed. Federal marshals patrolled the grounds. The stone building where Isaiah and others had been held was being thoroughly searched and documented. And in the main house, a team of clerks was going through every record, every ledger, every scrap of paper that might contain evidence. The enslaved people had gathered in the yard, uncertainty written on their faces. When Eleanor approached, accompanied by Victoria, Joseph, and the newly returned escapees, including Sarah and Isaiah, a murmur ran through the crowd. Esther stepped forward, her eyes questioning. "Miss Eleanor, what's happening?" Eleanor took a deep breath, looking out at the faces before her, people who had been considered property, including by her own family. The weight of history pressed down on her, demanding a response worthy of the moment. "River's End is changing," she announced, her voice carrying across the yard. "My father's true will has been discovered. In it, he directed that all enslaved people on this plantation be freed, with provisions for land and support." The reaction was mixed: shock, disbelief, cautious hope. Eleanor continued, determined to be completely honest. "I cannot undo the wrongs that have been done here, by my father, by Harland, by a system that never should have existed. But I can try to make amends, River's End will be divided. Those who wish to stay and farm their own land will receive a portion. Those who wish to leave will receive funds to help them start anew elsewhere." She gestured to Victoria. "My aunt is a federal prosecutor. She will ensure that these provisions are legally binding and cannot be reversed. And I—" She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I will stay to oversee the transition, if you will have me. Not as mistress of River's End, but as its caretaker, until the transformation is complete." A long silence followed her words. Then Joseph stepped forward. "Miss Eleanor risked her life to help us," he reminded the gathered people. "She could have turned away, pretended not to see, as so many do. Instead, she chose to stand with us." Isaiah joined him, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "She freed us when she could have saved only herself." Slowly, a consensus seemed to build. Nods, murmured agreements, a few tentative smiles. It was Esther who finally spoke for the group. "We accept your offer, Miss Eleanor. Not because we trust your family name. The trust was broken long ago, but because you've shown us who you are, and that person might be worth giving a chance." It wasn't forgiveness. Eleanor didn't expect that, nor did she deserve it. But it was a beginning, a chance to build something new from the ruins of a corrupt system. That evening, as the sun set over River's End, Eleanor stood beneath the magnolia tree where her mother was buried. The grave was unmarked, another attempt to erase Caroline Blackwood's resistance. Tomorrow, Eleanor would commission a proper headstone. For now, she simply sat beside the spot, feeling closer to her mother than she had in 20 years. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find the truth," she whispered to the gathering darkness, "but I'm here now, and I promise what happened to you won't be forgotten. What happened here won't be forgotten." From the main house came the sounds of activity, voices, movement, life continuing despite the revelations of the past days. The first steps in a long journey of transformation. River's End would never be the same, and neither would Eleanor Blackwood. 6 months passed, each day bringing new challenges and small victories to River's End. Spring had given way to summer, and now summer was yielding to the first cool breezes of autumn. The plantation, or former plantation, as Eleanor insisted on calling it, bore little resemblance to the place she had inherited. The most visible change was physical. The grand mansion still stood, but it no longer dominated the landscape as a symbol of power and oppression. Instead, it had been repurposed as a community center, with rooms dedicated to education, medical care, and administration of the new River's End Cooperative. The slave quarters had been demolished, replaced by proper homes. Modest but sturdy structures built on plots of land now legally owned by the former enslaved people who chose to stay. About 2/3 had remained, forming the core of the new community. The others had departed with their promised funds, seeking family members sold away or simply a fresh start, far from the memories of River's End. Eleanor lived in a small cottage near the former overseer's house, which had been converted into a school. Her days were filled with administrative work, supervising the legal transfers of land, organizing agricultural training, negotiating with merchants in town for fair prices for River's End's reduced but still substantial crops. The transition had not been without opposition. Many neighboring plantation owners viewed Eleanor as a traitor to her race and class, a dangerous radical undermining the foundations of Southern society. Threats had been made, both veiled and explicit. Twice, night riders had approached the property, only to be turned away by the armed patrol of former slaves who now protected their own land. Victoria had remained in Millerton for 2 months, using her legal expertise and federal connections to shield the fledgling community from the most serious threats. The trials of Harland, Reynolds, and their associates had revealed the extent of their operation, a network of corrupt officials, plantation owners, and traders who had profited from the secret commerce in human beings. The revelations had shocked even those accustomed to the brutalities of the slave system. Now, on a crisp October morning, Eleanor sat at her desk reviewing the ledgers, legitimate ones this time, recording the cooperative's first harvest and the distribution of profits among its members. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called, expecting Joseph, who served as the community's administrator. Instead, it was Sarah who stepped into the cottage, her expression somber. "Miss Eleanor, there's someone here to see you. A Mr. Blackwood." Eleanor froze, the name hitting her like a physical blow. "Blackwood? Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. Says he's your brother." "I don't have a brother," Eleanor said automatically. Then uncertainty crept in. Given everything else her father had concealed, could this be another secret revealed? "He's waiting at the community house," Sarah continued. "Isaiah is with him, making sure he doesn't wander." Eleanor nodded, gathering her composure. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll go at once." The walk to the community house gave Eleanor time to prepare herself. A brother. It seemed impossible. Yet after learning that her mother had died at River's End rather than in Boston, that her father had been murdered rather than succumbing to natural causes, she had learned to expect the impossible. The man waiting in the former parlour was tall and fair-haired, with a bearing that immediately marked him as gentry. He turned as Eleanor entered, and she was struck by a sense of familiarity, something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. "Miss Blackwood," he said, bowing slightly. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm Richard Blackwood." Eleanor remained by the door, keeping a cautious distance. "You claim to be my brother?" "Half-brother, to be precise." "Same father?" "Different mothers. My father never mentioned having another child." Richard's smile was bitter. "I'm not surprised." Edmund Blackwood was skilled at compartmentalizing his life, keeping his various enterprises separate. Isaiah, who had been standing unobtrusively in the corner, caught Eleanor's eye. She nodded slightly, indicating he should remain. "Please, sit," she said, taking a seat herself, "and explain why you've come to River's End." Richard settled into a chair across from her, his posture tense despite his attempt at casual elegance. "I've come because I recently learned of our father's death, and of the changes you've implemented here. News travels slowly to wherever you live, Mr. Blackwood. My father died over a year ago. I've been abroad, Europe primarily. I returned to Charleston only last month to find several urgent letters had been trying to reach me." He paused, studying her face. "Letters from associates of our father who were concerned about the disposition of his property." "You mean Harland and Reynolds?" Eleanor asked coldly. "They're awaiting trial in New Orleans, along with several others involved in their illegal trading operation." Richard's expression revealed nothing. "So I've been informed. A shocking business. I had no idea our father was involved in such activities." "Didn't you?" Eleanor couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "You speak of him as our father, yet claim no knowledge of how he made his fortune." "We were not close," Richard admitted. "He acknowledged me as his son, provided for my education, but kept me at a distance. My mother was not someone he wished to be reminded of." "And who was your mother?" A flash of something, pain, anger, crossed Richard's face. "Her name was Lucinda. She was enslaved here at River's End." The revelation struck Eleanor silent. She stared at Richard, seeing him anew. The fair skin that could pass for white in most company, the features that subtly revealed his mixed heritage to those who knew to look. "I was born here," Richard continued into her silence. "Raised in the house until I was 7, then sent north for education, with papers identifying me as white, a ward of Edmund Blackwood, wealthy planter." Eleanor found her voice. "Did my mother know? Caroline?" "Yes, she was kind to me, treated me as her own child. I believe that's why I was sent away. Our father couldn't bear to see her affection for another woman's son, especially a son who reminded him of his indiscretion." The pieces were falling into place. Another secret, another deception in the tangled history of River's End and Edmund Blackwood. "Why have you come here now?" Eleanor asked again. "What do you want?" Richard straightened, his manner becoming more businesslike. Legally, I have a claim to a portion of Edmund Blackwood's estate. His will acknowledged me as his son, regardless of the circumstances of my birth. You've come for money? I've come for what's mine by right, Richard corrected, though I understand that much of the estate has already been redistributed. Eleanor's guard rose. Was this man, this stranger claiming kinship, here to challenge the changes at River's End, to reclaim property that had been freed? If you're hoping to reverse what's been done here, you'll be disappointed, she said firmly. The transfers are legal and binding. The people of River's End own their land now. To her surprise, Richard laughed, a short, sharp sound without much humor. Reverse it? Why would I want to? I spent my childhood as property, Miss Blackwood. The last thing I desire is to perpetuate that system. Then what do you want? Justice, perhaps? Recognition? Or simply to see for myself what has become of the place that shaped my earliest memories? He glanced around the transformed parlor. I must admit, it's not what I expected. Eleanor studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Could she trust this man who appeared from nowhere, claiming blood ties to both the oppressors and the oppressed of River's End? There is money, she said finally. Not as much as there might have been if the plantation had continued operating as before, but enough for a reasonable inheritance if your claim proves legitimate. Richard nodded. I anticipated as much. But money isn't my primary concern. I have my own resources from investments in Europe. Then what? I want to know about him, Richard said, his voice suddenly vulnerable. About Edmund Blackwood, the man, not the planter or the businessman or the father who sent me away. I've spent my life wondering who I really am, not the fiction created for society, but my true self. And half of that self came from him. The request was so unexpected, so human, that Eleanor felt her suspicion wavering. Here was someone who, like her, had been shaped by Edmund Blackwood's decisions and deceptions, someone trying to make sense of a fragmented inheritance. I'm not sure I'm the right person to tell you about him, she admitted. I'm learning myself that I never really knew him. Then perhaps we can discover the truth together, Richard suggested. I have pieces of the puzzle you may not. Letters he sent me over the years, memories from my early childhood here. Together, we might assemble a clearer picture. Eleanor considered the offer. There was risk in trusting this stranger, but also potential reward, answers to questions that had haunted her since discovering her father's secret ledger. You're welcome to stay at River's End while we verify your claim, she said finally. The cottage next to mine is vacant. It's simple but comfortable. Thank you. I'd be grateful. Richard hesitated, then asked, May I tour the plantation? The cooperative, I mean. I'd like to see how it's changed. Isaiah can show you around. Eleanor nodded to the man still standing quietly in the corner. If he's willing. Isaiah stepped forward. I'll show Mr. Blackwood what River's End has become, he agreed, his expression neutral but watchful. As the two men left, Eleanor remained seated, her mind whirling with this new complication. A half-brother born of her father's exploitation of an enslaved woman. Another secret, another legacy of River's End's dark history. She would need to be cautious, to verify Richard's claims independently. But if he was telling the truth, and something in her gut told her he was, then he represented yet another dimension of the reckoning she had undertaken. The next few days established a cautious routine. Richard spent his mornings with Eleanor, reviewing documents and sharing what he knew of Edmund Blackwood. In the afternoons, he explored the cooperative, sometimes accompanied by Isaiah or Joseph, sometimes alone. He appeared genuinely interested in the new community taking shape, offering suggestions based on agricultural methods he had observed in Europe. Slowly, a picture emerged of Edmund Blackwood that was more complex than either of them had known. A man of contradictions, capable of exploiting human beings for profit, yet also providing for a son born of that very exploitation. A partner in a criminal enterprise who eventually developed misgivings, even if too late to save himself. He wrote to me after your mother died, Richard told Eleanor one evening as they sat on her cottage porch. It was the first time he expressed regret. Not explicitly, but I could read between the lines. He said he was reconsidering certain arrangements and that the price of prosperity had proven too high. But he continued the trading for years afterward, Eleanor pointed out. Yes, I think he was a coward in the end. Trapped in a web partly of his own making, too afraid to break free until it was almost too late. They were interrupted by Joseph hurrying up the path, his expression grim. "Miss Eleanor, riders coming. 12 at least." Eleanor rose quickly. "Night riders? This late in the day?" "No, ma'am. These aren't hiding their faces. Marshal Collins is leading them." Richard stood as well, alert. "The federal marshal? What would bring him here?" "I don't know," Eleanor said, already moving toward the main road. "But we'd better find out." The approaching group was indeed led by Marshal Collins, who had been involved in the initial arrests of Harland and Reynolds. Behind him rode several deputies and what appeared to be a contingent of state militia. Eleanor met them at the entrance to the cooperative, Joseph and Richard flanking her. "Marshal Collins, this is unexpected." Collins dismounted, his face grave. "Miss Blackwood, I wish this were a social call." He noticed Richard. "And you are?" "Richard Blackwood, Edmund Blackwood's son." Collins's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment on the revelation. "Miss Blackwood, I have unfortunate news. There was an incident at the New Orleans courthouse yesterday. During transport to their trial, Harland and Reynolds escaped custody." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. "Escaped? How?" "They had help, well-organized and well-funded help. 3 guards were killed." Collins removed his hat, running a hand through his grey hair. "We have reason to believe they may be headed this way." "Why would they come here?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "Revenge," Richard said quietly, "and to destroy evidence, witnesses." Collins nodded. "That's our assessment as well, which is why I've brought reinforcements. The militia will remain at River's End until Harland and Reynolds are recaptured." Eleanor glanced at the armed men, their uniforms marking them as representatives of the same state that had long protected the institution of slavery. "And can they be trusted, Marshal, given the sentiments many still hold about what we're doing here?" "These men are under federal authority for this operation, Miss Blackwood. They'll follow my orders." Collins's expression softened slightly. "Besides, not everyone supports what Harland and his associates were doing. Even those who defend slavery draw the line at murder and illegal trading." It was a small comfort, but Eleanor had to accept it. The threat posed by Harland and Reynolds was too great to refuse assistance, whatever its source. "We'll need to organize our own defense as well," Joseph said. "Set watches, secure the perimeter." "Agreed," Collins said. "My men will coordinate with yours, Mr. Just Joseph, sir." Collins nodded, accepting the correction. "Very well, Joseph. Let's discuss strategy." As the men moved off to plan the cooperative's defense, Eleanor found herself alone with Richard. "You don't have to stay for this," she told him. "It's not your fight." Richard's expression hardened. "Isn't it? Harland was my father's right hand for years. He knew about me, about my mother. He was part of the system that treated us as things rather than people." He shook his head. "No, this is very much my fight." Over the next 2 days, River's End transformed once more, this time into a fortress. Barricades were erected at strategic points. Watches were established, with mixed groups of militia and cooperative members patrolling day and night. The women and children were gathered in the community house, which offered the best protection. Eleanor worked alongside everyone else, filling sandbags, distributing weapons, organizing supplies. The sense of shared purpose was palpable. Former slaves and federal forces united against a common enemy. On the 3rd night, the attack came. It began with fire, the oldest weapon against human habitation. Flaming arrows arced through the darkness, landing on rooftops and fields. The defenders had anticipated this tactic and responded quickly, teams rushing to extinguish the flames before they could spread. Under cover of this distraction, the attackers breached the western perimeter. Gunfire erupted as the patrol there engaged the intruders. Eleanor, awakened by the commotion, grabbed the rifle she now kept beside her bed and ran toward the sounds of battle. Joseph intercepted her. "Stay back, Miss Eleanor. Head to the community house." "I'm not hiding while others fight," she insisted. Before Joseph could argue further, a figure emerged from the darkness behind him. Eleanor barely had time to shout a warning before the butt of a rifle struck Joseph in the back of the head, sending him crumpling to the ground. Harlan stepped over Joseph's unconscious form, his face illuminated by the distant fires, twisted with hatred. "Miss Blackwood," he said, raising his rifle to point at her chest, "how fitting that I find you first." Eleanor kept her own rifle steady, aimed at Harlan. "It's over, Harlan. The truth is already known. Killing me won't change that." "Perhaps not. But it will be immensely satisfying nonetheless." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Your father should have let me handle you from the beginning, just as I handled your mother." "So you did kill her," Eleanor said, playing for time, listening for sounds of approaching allies. "Not directly, but I made sure her fever progressed unimpeded." Harlan's smile was chilling. "Just as I helped your father's heart give out when he became problematic. And now you'll kill me too, adding another murder to your record. Self-defense, I think. A plantation mistress defending her property against escaped prisoners. Who would question it?" Eleanor realized with a sickening clarity that he was right. Even now, with all the progress they had made, a white man's word would likely prevail over evidence to the contrary, especially a white man with connections like Harlan's. "The cooperative is legally established," she said, still stalling. "You can't reverse that, even if you kill me. Legal arrangements can be challenged. Documents can be lost, especially when those who witnessed them are no longer alive to testify." Harlan took a step forward. "Enough talk. Drop your weapon, Miss Blackwood. I'll make it quick, at least." Eleanor stood her ground, rifle still raised. "No." Harlan's expression hardened. Then a shot rang out, but it wasn't from Eleanor's rifle or Harlan's. Harlan staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as he dropped to his knees. Behind him stood Richard, a smoking pistol in his hand. "That was for my mother," Richard said calmly, "and for all the others who suffered at your hands." Harlan tried to raise his rifle again, but another shot, this one from Eleanor, ensured he never would. He collapsed face first into the dirt of River's End, the ground he had soaked with the blood and tears of so many. Richard moved to Eleanor's side. "Are you hurt?" "No." "But Joseph—" They knelt beside the fallen man, Eleanor checking for a pulse while Richard stood guard. "He's alive," she said with relief, "just unconscious." Around them, the sounds of fighting were dying down. Shouts from the militia suggested they were gaining the upper hand against the attackers. "Reynolds?" Eleanor asked. "Captured alive, according to what I heard before coming to find you," Richard answered. "Most of their men have surrendered or fled." Eleanor sat back on her heels, suddenly exhausted. The immediate danger might be past, but she knew the larger struggle was far from over. River's End had survived its first major test, but there would be others. The forces that had shaped the South for generations would not yield easily to change. As dawn broke over River's End, the full toll of the night's attack became clear. 2 militia members dead, several cooperative members wounded, 1 building destroyed by fire. But the community had held together, had defended itself successfully. Marshal Collins found Eleanor tending to the wounded in the community house. "Miss Blackwood, I've been looking for you. I understand you and Mr. Blackwood encountered Harlan." "Yes, he's dead." Collins nodded. "So I've been informed. Clear case of self-defense from all accounts." "And Reynolds?" "Captured, along with 5 of their men. The rest scattered." Collins looked around at the former slaves working alongside the militia to treat the injured. "Your people fought well, bravely. They were defending their homes, Eleanor said simply. Their freedom. Indeed. Collins hesitated, then added, Miss Blackwood, I should inform you that this attack, it changes things. Politically, I mean. Eleanor looked at him sharply. How so? Attacking a community under federal protection? Killing government agents? Even those sympathetic to Harlan's cause can't defend that. The governor himself has issued a statement condemning the attack and pledging state support for the cooperative. But it was unexpected news, a political shift that could provide crucial protection for River's End going forward. That's encouraging, Eleanor said cautiously. It is, though I wouldn't expect a complete change of heart from all quarters. Collins smiled slightly. Change comes slowly in these parts, as I'm sure you've noticed. But it does come, Eleanor replied. Eventually. The days following the attack brought a steady stream of visitors to River's End. Federal officials documenting the incident, reporters from newspapers as far away as New York, eager to write about the Battle of River's End. Even neighboring planters, some offering tentative support, others simply curious about the community that had successfully defended itself against such odds. Eleanor received them all with the same quiet dignity, neither apologizing for the cooperative's existence nor gloating over its victory. The story she told was simple and consistent. River's End was transforming a legacy of oppression into one of opportunity and self-determination. Those who wished to support that transformation were welcome. Those who opposed it would find the community prepared to defend itself. Richard remained at River's End through it all, his presence a tangible reminder of how the past and present intertwined. He had officially presented his claim to a portion of Edmund Blackwood's estate, which Eleanor had acknowledged without hesitation. But rather than taking his inheritance and departing, he had chosen to invest it in the cooperative, establishing a fund for education and training. I've been thinking about staying, he told Eleanor one evening, a month after the attack. They were walking along the river, watching the sun set over the water that had given River's End its name. Permanently, I mean. Here, at River's End. Yes, there's work to be done here that matters, and... He paused, searching for words. I've spent my life between worlds, belonging nowhere entirely. Perhaps it's time to choose a place to stand, to build something that honors both sides of my heritage without being defined by either. Eleanor understood. In her own way, she too had been caught between worlds, the privileged daughter of a Boston family and the inheritor of a slave plantation's bloody legacy. River's End had become her place to stand, to attempt redemption not just for herself, but for generations past. You would be welcome, she said simply. We need all the allies we can get. Richard smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Not just an ally, I hope. A brother. Eleanor returned the smile, feeling a connection that transcended the complicated circumstances of their shared paternity. A brother, she agreed. As they continued their walk, the river flowing steadily beside them, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From naive inheritor to reluctant witness to active participant in change, River's End had transformed her as much as she had transformed it. The plantation's dark history could never be erased. The suffering that had occurred on this land, the lives broken and stolen, the blood spilled, these were indelible stains that no amount of good intentions could wash away. But perhaps, Eleanor reflected, redemption didn't require forgetting the past. Perhaps it meant acknowledging it fully, then building something new from its ruins. River's End would never be innocent, but it could be a testament to the possibility of change, to the resilience of those who had endured its worst days, to the power of freedom long denied, but finally grasped. As darkness fell over the land once called a plantation, now called a cooperative, Eleanor Blackwood turned toward home, not the grand house that had once symbolized ownership and control, but the modest cottage where she lived as just one member of a community forging its own destiny. Behind her, the river flowed on, carrying the stories of River's End to the wider world, stories of oppression and resistance, of complicity and redemption, of a reckoning long overdue but finally begun. And ahead, though still distant and uncertain, lay the promise of a future where such stories might someday be relegated to history, remembered but not repeated. Until that day, Eleanor would continue the work of transformation, not just of River's End, but of herself, step by step, day by day, choice by choice. It was the only path to freedom for her and for all who had been bound by the sins of the past.